Okay, I think we are ready. And we will move on now with the last panel for this conference today. I'm Alexander Krzalowski, Director of the Macedonian Center for International Cooperation and also coordinator of the Seldi network. And I got the privilege to moderate this last session, though some would say it is a punishment to do that. Well, I guess we have the real fighters against corruption in the room now, after everybody else left, and the people committed to this work and to this problem are here really interested to hear more about what the panelists have to say on the topic of implementing policies and strategies to practically fight corruption. And for that, we have actually two directors of anti-corruption agencies from the region, from Montenegro and Kosovo, and three researchers, analysts that are following and developing tools, basically, for more effective fight against corruption. With me here today are Dr. Todor Galev from the Center of Study of Democracy, Director of Research, and probably creator of many of these methodologies that CSD is implementing. Il Buleshkai from the Director of the Anti-Corruption Agency in Kosovo. Jelena Perovic, the same for Montenegro. Sofia Petkova is from International Republican Institute, program manager senior program manager in Bulgaria. And finally, Andrei Maksut, senior researcher in the Romanian Academic Society. So in the next around 1 hour, everybody will have around 10 minutes to present their view on the tools, let's say, for assessment on anti-corruption policies and how we can do better as even with all these things done in the past. Seldi reports show that the corruption is still on a very high level in the Balkan region, and obviously we should do more to tackle this problem on various aspects. This will be good to emphasize the cooperation between public bodies and NGOs or other monitoring bodies, and where to focus, whether on local level corruption, whether on high level corruption, or whether on public procurements, on lobbying for getting tenders, etc., and other points of high corruption. So I would not prolong more. I'll give the floor to Dr. Todor Galev from CSD to enter the debate on these topics.
I have a presentation. Okay. Hello all, and thank you for being with us here today. Actually, I'll showcase you one of our methodologies that have been implemented in many of the countries in the region. And in many cases with the strong support of our Seldi partners. So thank you all of you that have been engaged in this and make it possible. This is what we called our MACP, or Monitoring Anti-Corruption Policy Implementation Methodology, which was developed in 2015 with the support of the DG Home at the European Commission, and since then implemented in many countries and many different public organizations. Just to say that this methodology is actually built to be a policy tool. So it is designed to be either a part of a broader policy cycle, which means that it could be part of what we call state capture assessment diagnostics, and MACP methodology could serve as an element of this assessment, which can lead to particular investigations, but it could be also used as a separate tool for assessing the policy, the effectiveness and applicability of anti-corruption policies and measures on institutional level. Actually, it was designed for an assessment and periodic monitoring of anti-corruption policies was designed as assisted self-assessment approach, which is important from the viewpoint of the public organizations, because public organizations want to have instruments that can run by themselves and not always subcontracting external experts for this. It is applied through a quantitative surveys among institution employees, external experts familiar with the institution activities, and what we call clients of the public institution. So physical or legal persons that interact with the public institution and that actually use the public services offered by the public institution. And last but not least, the MACPI diagnostic cycle was designed to assess not only the estimate level of corruption risk within the institutions, but also the levels of corruption pressure. So actual experience, and this is an important thing because when you compare, and I'll show you in a while this example, when you compare the actual experience with what is the estimation of the employees, so actual experience of clients of the institution with the estimation of the organization employees, you can see the differences. Just to give you an example, in last year actually, we had the chance to introduce a very similar, based on this MACPI approach, methodology for assessment of corruption risk in the National Revenue Agency of Bulgaria. And what we found was that the estimation and the assessment of the clients of National Revenue Agency for one of the activities that have been estimated shows that this activity is much more higher, has much more higher risk than the estimation of the employees themselves. And this is how this could help the public organization to design better anti-corruption policies and measures. The MACPI methodology includes first of all, as I said, surveys with officials, so employees of the organization, experts, external experts that have been familiar with this organization, and clients. In addition, it also includes some in-depth interviews that are needed to give deeper knowledge on the anti-corruption policies and measures that have been assessed. And just to flash two examples, here are the results from the analysis of Bulgarian Ministry of Defense, which shows what is the actual corruption pressure and actually which activities are covered by specific anti-corruption policies or measures. Of course, this is anonymized, so sorry for this, but we don't, the names and the titles of the actual anti-corruption policies and measures are confidential, and as well the activities. So you can see the discrepancies where for example, activity 2 is covered by several anti-corruption policies and measures. The percentage shows whether this is, there is a coverage of this activity with the respective policy. But at the same time, the actual corruption pressure, which is given above, 13%, shows that this is one of the less risky activities actually in the Ministry of Defense. So these discrepancies between what is the actual corruption pressure and whether and where the existing policies actually cover these activities is also telling for the management. So these results are designed to serve the management of the public organization and to fine-tune the existing anti-corruption policies or to design new ones. Just another example, in addition to the possibility to compare between the assessments or estimation between employees and clients or experts, there is also possibility to compare the estimates within the different group of employees. And here in the results of the Bulgarian Border Police from 2015, you see that the management staff of Bulgarian Border Police actually think that two activities related to the I would say the central role of the border police, so the checkpoints activities at the border are much more risky than the estimation of the regular employees. And here the question could be, is it true that these activities are less risky, or the employees actually knowing that there is higher risk in these activities, knowing that there are some corruption deals, that there are some corruption presence in these activities, they actually give what we call socially acceptable answer. And in the beginning, when you start the analysis, you don't know which is the answer of this question, but you can see the differences and you can start digging deeper and deeper. I'll stop here, and just to conclude with this, it is important that when we are designing methodologies for analyzing some kind of corruption policies, or in this case, the effectiveness of anti-corruption policies at institutional level, to design it in a way that could not only serve the research purposes that many of us have, but also to serve the purposes of the public institutions. So that's why we think that this kind of methodologies and approaches that give the possibility of public institutions to strengthen and to make better their existing anti-corruption policies and measures based on evidences, so based on hard data, based on research data. It's an important step towards better anti-corruption environment in the whole country. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Galev, for sharing the MACP methodology with whom I think Seldi partners are very well acquainted and implemented already in several institutions in each of the Balkan countries. So I guess representatives from the institutions can learn from it and implement it in their own institution to see the risks and how to fight corruption, and as a good tool to assess each individual institution. Maybe the anti-corruption agencies have done it for themselves, and we will see from the next two speakers. And we will start with Il Buleshkai from the Kosovo Anti-Corruption Agency. So, Mr. Buleshkai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be among leading scholars as Professor Todor on the field of anti-corruption, and also among practitioners from the region and the field of anti-corruption. We are here, as the first speaker stated, after some developments in very near and to Bulgaria, to our countries, where this violence that's happening in Ukraine has tested our systems and made visible more how weak we can be from the foreign influence. And that makes extremely importance how our countries, namely our institutions, work and deal in the sense of preventing corruption, preventing possibilities to get corrupt and then influenced either from foreign influence or from in-country influence. I will do just a very brief introduction of myself. I'm leading the institution since end of 2021, so I'm pretty new on the field. And the agency also changed the name in this process. So it's interesting also to mention, because as the topic of this panel is revision of policies. So it's great when our legislators have time to review the policies and make the necessary adoptions, because same as anything else, same as human beings, even institutions develop and find other spaces that are not covered and need to be covered from the work. I'll do also a very short introduction of the organization I'm leading, because it will bring some context to what I'm saying at a later stage. So I'm director of Agency for Prevention of Corruption, while the agency was established as Anti-Corruption Agency of Kosovo in 2006. Can I get the... Okay, sorry, no, I can get it. It's a great pleasure to have it passed from Professor. Okay, so yeah, the agency is pretty small as an agency. It has around 42 staff employees organized in 4 departments. One of them is Finance and General Affairs, as any other institution, while the other 3 ones are dealing with the mandate of the agency, which is Declaration and Verification of Assets and Gifts, and its Department for Fighting Corruption. That it will take a bit more time on my presentation, because it deals with investigation, administrative investigation, and pre-crime investigation, or preliminary investigation as we call it, and its Department for Prevention of Conflict of Interest. Why I mentioned 42 employees. Kosovo has around 2 million inhabitants and around 10,000 square kilometers with around 200 institutions. So in order to have the context of the scope of the work, I think it's important to see how much resources state includes in the prevention of corruption, or in some other cases on fighting of corruption, being that in prosecution and judiciary. So we are in charge for declaring common assets of public officials and verifying this. Also, we do administrative investigations, including political party finances in a sense. We do work on prevention of conflict of interest. An important tool that we have a role is protection of whistleblowers. And we deal with investigation of external whistleblowing reports. And furthermore, we do also monitoring of public procurement activities. On top of this, from last year, we do assessment of legislation in the sense of corruption proofing of legislation, support and monitor integrity plans of institutions, and we are planning to start sector risk analysis on corruption based on methodology that Council of Europe through Greco mechanisms are about to finalize. Okay, I'm not stopping only because we have the four main laws that we work, and since I joined the institution, we have experienced a number of successes. We have doubled criminal reports sent to prosecution compared to a year before. So from 150 cases, last year we have sent 254. Then from monitoring 108 procurement procedures, we have monitored 218, and we have issued 211 recommendations. So we believe we have improved at least 211 procurement procedures. And then, last but not least important, we have reviewed 225 cases of potential conflict of interest compared to 105 a year before. These numbers for us are impressive in the sense, but they not necessarily show either the level of corruption or they show the level of success. It's statistics, the way how we want to interpret. But what we wanted to say with these numbers is that we believe that public and the public's trust on institution increased, and I think this is also crucial for the success of any institution, including ours and the institutions of my colleagues around. In the sense of doing investigation, we can open two kinds of investigation. One, if someone reports. The second one, we come to that information, then we start and ex officio initiate this kind of investigations. Something about techniques that we use, similar most probably to anyone else here, but it's, I think, good to reinstate. So we do a document examination, we take written statements from parties involved, we do interviews with the parties involved, we investigate their past, the history of offenses, because based on that we can draw conclusions if it can go just with a warning or it needs to go to prosecution. We seek information from institutions, and here is also crucial. We contribute with tax administration. We cooperate with cadastral agency and with all the databases that can give us information in order to finalize any case. With F, usually it's a fail, but I think it's crucial also to see the circumstances related to the case, because sometimes it may seem that something is like violation, but it ends up not to be. And at the end, all these documents, all this information is analyzed properly from the limited number of staffers. Outcomes, yes, we can send criminal reports, we can close cases. I think there was a number of agencies, especially in Western Europe, that they cannot close a case without a decision of prosecution. We have that power. And then we follow up all these cases in all these two institutions. I think it's important to have some provisions in the legislation regarding cooperation and feedback received from institutions. In the past, we were having problems, so it depended on the will of a given prosecutor to send back information what's happening with this case that we are giving to the prosecution for further proceeding, whereas the new law obliges this prosecution and police to inform us about how they dealt with the cases, and in case they overthrow, we have the right to complain with new law in place to the prosecution of appeals, or we can go back and do our administrative investigation and recommend measures, disciplinary measures against staffers, and which is what is very important, and I think is a very strong tool that we have in our hands, is We can annul decisions, for example, that are taken if they are taken on the conflict of interest basis, for example. So we do not have to send this case to prosecution. We can automatically annul, and then the institution has to sue us and to get the rights through the judiciary. Last but not least important, I think it's very important, it helped us a lot, cooperation with civil society, because of limited number, because of limited resources, and also because of limited ability to do research either in country or out of country. Civil society in Kosovo, including media, was crucial to raise and to report cases to the agency. And I can freely say the cases that took the most of the public attention were the cases that we have received either from civil society or from media, which is and I think that open line of communication and share information with civil society and with media is crucial. Okay, I'm not stopping into the challenges, but I think there are possibilities to benefit from the new technology. With an agency, we are looking to use artificial intelligence in reviewing the reports, because we get a lot of documents that we cannot, like paper-based, draw conclusions. So we are part of 2 international projects, and we believe that we'll be able to benefit from these 2. One is to use the South Korea model of clean portal for Kosovo purposes. Another one is the development project of University of Pristina and some other universities in Europe to use artificial intelligence to help us draw red flags and have kind of draw indications about potential violations or misuse of office. And I think another great opportunity that we see in our work is either like regional initiatives as the RAI or meetings like this, and we benefit a lot. So I think the key, for me, how to say, like common denominator is cooperation, either with internal stakeholders or with regional stakeholders, because we are not very different, so to say. I think an issue that may be today in Moldova, it's very possible that it's happening in Kosovo, but we could not notice that. So it's, and also having open doors and very sincere cooperation with civil society, with the ones that work at least in the anti-corruption and ethics field is crucial if you want to have some kind of success. And I believe we have showed some success in the last 2 years. Kosovo as a country is progressing either in the databases of Freedom House or in other databases or Transparency International databases. So we believe this is reached only because we managed to have good and sincere cooperation with all these stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Buleshke, and especially for emphasizing the cooperation and with civil society, including the media, as we are both on the same boat, I guess, in fighting corruption. We will have some doubts about the public institutions, as probably the corruption is mainly there, but at least anti-corruption agencies and civil society are naturally committed to that. I was also glad to hear that Macedonians are not the only ones with identity issues, that you had to change the name as well. But also from the statistics that you mentioned, I was also surprised that with 2 million people you have 200 institutions. I think that we also with 2 million have 1,300 institutions. So we are good. And finally, your statistics on the cases reminded me of a joke about statistics that says it's like bikini, it's showing a lot, but not the most important or interesting parts. And in your case, yes, the number was 254 cases submitted for criminal prosecution, but you didn't tell us, or statistics didn't show how many ended up in jail from those cases. But let's keep that for the debate later and give the floor now to another director of the agency, anti-corruption agency, this time in Montenegro, Jelena Perovic.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to share with you good practices regarding the work and methodologies that we apply, which ensure non-selectivity in our actions and support our independencies on behalf of Montenegro and the institution I head, the Agency of Prevention of Corruption. We have been profoundly satisfied since we have just left the best year since the establishment of the agency, in which our results were recognized by international partners, primarily the European Commission and GRECO, from whom we received praise for our performance in the prevention of corruption. During the 7 years since we has been founded, our institution has developed a sophisticated system for checking the income and assets for public officials, which is established electronic database and networking with the state institutions obtain relevant data. The control of property records has been carried out based on the annual verification plan adopted following the recommendation of the experts of the Council of Europe. The checking procedure has been based on methodologies that guarantees non-selectivity and excludes the possibility of subjective and based selection of public officials and civil servants. The score of our work in this area is evidenced by the fact that in 2022 we received 11,784 reports on income and assets, the most ever on an annual basis. We controlled 1,778 reports, which exceeded the annual plan by 30% and the performance from 2021 by 60%. Moreover, our institution completed the additional check, the most complex type for control, which refers to 20 high-ranking officials elected following the degree of vulnerability of the area of functions to corruption. With a proactive approach, we initiated 423 administrative procedures and submit 1,057 requests to initiated misdemeanor procedure, in both cases the most since the existing of our institution. At the same time, the number of proceedings initiated against former and currently public officials is almost equal, which confirms our indiscrimination method. Being deeply proud of these results, we are also aware that there is a room for further progress for additional improvement of efficiencies and effectiveness. For this reason, in the coming period, in cooperation with the experts of the Council of Europe, we will develop a methodology for in-depth verification of the assets of public officials to create an effective mechanism that would, among other things, also include the verification of members of the joint household and persons related to the public officials. Another novelty planned for this year is the connecting of the agency with the monitoring electronic public procurement system in the area of conflict of interest and control of data submitted by political subjects. We have also achieved measurable results in terms of detection and prevention conflict of interest and respecting restriction on the performance of public functions as a result of educational activities aimed at strengthening public officials' awareness of their legal obligation as well as trust in the agency, its importance and the quality of of work. In 2022, we received 230 requests for opinion of the existence of conflict of interests and limitation in the performance of public functions, the most since the establishment, and acted on all of them based on the given opinions and decisions. 24 public officials resigned. Thanks to a large part to our efforts in prevention conflict of interest and declaring assets, the European Commission stated in the report on the progress of Montenegro for 2022 that the balance of results in the prevention of corruption has further been improved, especially due to the positive trend in the work of the agency. The Greco made a similar statement about our performance in its evaluation report of Montenegro. When it comes to the methodologies I mentioned at the beginning, as a part of the project implemented by RAI in July 2017, the methodology for assessing the risk of corruption in regulation in Montenegro was developed. It contains a checklist for assessing the risk of corruption in regulation and an overview of all potential risks that may arise in the adoption of a certain normative act. In cooperation with the UNDP in Montenegro, we worked on the improvement of the methodology and certain analyses that comprise comparative analysis of practice in 11 countries and analysis of the situation in Montenegro, which recommendation for improving the situation in the area and proposal for a preliminary checklist of corruption risk. The improved methodology enables easier and more objective identification of regulation that could potentially be the subject of the agency analysis. The strengthen the integrity of the authorities, the agency in cooperation with the UNDP in November 2022 create a methodology for assessing the application of anti-corruption measures in the judicial system to improve the content and effects of the plans of the integrity of the judicial authorities. It envisages the development of criteria and indicators based on the integrity plans, based on which scoring and ranking of authorities in the aforementioned system will be carried out. In December 2022, a special IT application was developed for the application of the methodology. The agency created the methodology for the assessment of the application of anti-corruption measures in 2021 and applied with that version to two systems, state administration and social and child protection. The purpose of methodology is to assess whether authorities implement anti-corruption measures and whether their application has positive effects, as well as to encourage authorities to be proactive when planning and implementing anti-corruption measures. It is planned that the coming period, the methodology will be extended to authorities from the other 7 sectors: local self-government, education, health, state-owned enterprises, enterprise owned by local self-government units, independent and regulatory authorities, and culture. The ultimate goal is to increase the awareness of employees in the public sector about the importance of integrity plans and the preventive fight against corruption. Finally, we believe that the agency will continue to make a visible contribution to the the fight against corruption and the rule of law system written the framework set by the law and the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. I would like to thank the organizers, the Center of Democratic Studies, the Romania Academic Society, and the Leadership for Development of Integrity of South Europe on the call for participants. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you very much, Jelena, for updating on improvements that the agency is doing in Montenegro, and especially on what you said, that some of those 200 or something cases that were reported to you for conflict of interest led to some resignation. I think in Macedonia we are still to see any resignation on any issue. In the last 20 years there was no such thing, so we can count this as a progress, and I think this is also one monitoring tool, both how many cases end up in resignations of politicians, or how many are prosecuted in judiciary, and how many are actually sentenced for corruptive practices. So thank you on that. And we move on. I don't know about you, but I'm freezing here. I guess that if that is to keep us awake, then fine, but I hope we'll warm up the atmosphere with the external view from institutions. So I give the floor to Sofia Petkova. She will focus more on the local level, on municipal corruption. So please.
Thank you, Alexander. Let me just start by saying what a pleasure it is for me to be here with you today and have this opportunity to share about IRI's programming at the municipal level in Bulgaria. Let me just mention a few words about IRI. The International Republican Institute is a non-government, non-partisan organization that's operating globally in over 100 countries. And our programming focuses on, broadly speaking, fostering democracy. IRI's programming in Bulgaria is focused at countering corruption at the municipal level. We have an ongoing program that started in the autumn of 2021. Our program, as you can see on this map, covers 10 municipalities as currently speaking. The aims of our program are to first identify vulnerabilities to corruption, secondly, to generate solutions to those vulnerabilities based on input both from government and non-government stakeholders. The ultimate objective of our programming, however, is to design, adopt, and implement municipal anti-corruption reform agendas, which I believe is the reason why we are part of this panel, as an example of what happens on the ground. On this slide, you can see the different elements that our program consists of, the different stages and how they come one after the other. So we started with a vulnerabilities to corruption assessment process in the 10 municipalities. We also conducted municipal polls. We then had the leaders of our municipalities, that is the mayors, sign a municipal anti-corruption pact at the National Anti-Corruption Conference that we held last year in July here in Sofia. We later on started a process of design and adoption of reform agendas, anti-corruption reform agendas for each of those 10 municipalities. This process was implemented through municipal working groups that I will tell you a bit more about later on in the presentation. The reform agendas were then sent to the mayors of the municipalities for official adoption. We are now in the majority of the municipalities at the stage of initiating reform implementation, and in parallel we held a training for CSOs, and we plan to hold a training for representatives of local governments. I will now talk about the methodology that stands behind all those elements. The IRI approach focuses on vulnerabilities to corruption, and here we must make one major distinction. Our programming is in the realm of mitigating vulnerabilities, that is, ensuring prevention of corruption through reforms, as opposed to uprooting corruption, which would require punishment, judicial action, and investigations in actual corruption going on. Our VCA methodology, I will use this abbreviation throughout the presentation. It refers to the Vulnerabilities to Corruption Approach Assessment Methodology, has three main pillars. We start with a political economy analysis, which identifies the main windows of opportunity, but also the main challenges and bottlenecks. Based on this political economy analysis, we select a number of various stakeholders at the municipal level in all municipalities that we work with, and we collect data, qualitative data through semi-structured interviews. We then distilled this data and we designed the vulnerabilities to corruption reports, one report per each municipality. Each report then went through the third pillar of the VCA methodology, that is stakeholder validation. Stakeholder validation happened through working groups that I mentioned earlier, and I will go back to in a bit. What are the main VCA findings? So VCA findings are very specific to each of the 10 municipalities that we've implemented our program with. But there are 5 that are rather overarching and we can safely say hold true for all 10 municipalities. First, corruption prevention mechanisms are in place in compliance with national level legislation and requirements, but they are seldom, if at all, used, which creates problems for deterrence and also lowers citizens' trust in those mechanisms. Secondly, transparency is practiced as a formality, again, in compliance with national level legislation, but without ease of use, without a thought as to its accessibility and completeness. Thirdly, informal channels are preferred by citizens and they're used to bypass administrations, which creates a number of other vulnerabilities in respect to accountability, selectivity of access, and so on and so forth. Fourth, and this is no surprise, I guess, to anyone in the room, citizens are disengaged from official participation channels and mechanisms. Again, needless to mention the vulnerabilities that this creates in respect to monitoring of decision makers and accountability. Fifthly, there is no substantive policy role for civil society. That is to say, they are consulted, civil society organizations and groupings are consulted on an ad hoc basis, usually when there is a problem, but not in a sustainable manner. What are the implications for policymakers? There are a number of implications, and you can see the 3 leading ones on this slide. I will just mention what is the most important in my view for the current audience that we have gathered here today, and that is anti-corruption work needs to be taken outside Sofia and outside the big cities, and the national anti-corruption framework needs to be supplemented with local systems for prevention of corruption. The qualitative tool of the VCA, we supplemented with the quantitative tool of municipal polls. I will not go into detail here. The most important about conducting those polls is that they created evidence on citizens' perceptions of corruption as a problem at the municipal level. And you can see on the right-hand side of this slide that in all 10 municipalities, 50 or 50+% of respondents said that corruption is somewhat of a problem in their municipality. We, equipped with this qualitative and quantitative data, we asked the mayors of the 10 municipalities to sign a municipal anti-corruption pact. What is the importance of this pact from a methodology point of view? It is important because it signaled political support and commitment right before we embarked on the process of designing the reform, anti-corruption reform agendas. The design of the reform agendas was done through working groups that brought together representatives of the local administrations, municipal councils, and CSOs. IRI equipped those working groups with a catalog of reforms that they were free to amend, expand, and we took them through a two-stage process whereby they first selected the vulnerabilities to corruption that they wanted to address through the reform agendas, and secondly, worked on the reforms with which they wanted these vulnerabilities to be addressed. The designed reform agendas were adopted by unanimity by the working groups, which ensured a multi-stakeholder consensus on the vulnerabilities, but also on the solutions for those vulnerabilities. The reform agendas were submitted to the mayors of the municipalities in December 22. So far, we have 6 official adoptions by decisions of municipal councils. You can see a list of the municipalities that adopted those reform agendas in the order of adoption. There are 4 municipalities that remain to adopt the reform agendas shortly within the next months. On this slide, you will see some examples of the reforms that are part of the reform agendas. Those examples relate to a variety of vulnerabilities, but can be broadly clustered in reforms that tackle challenges related to transparency, challenges related to the salience of integrity mechanisms, and challenges related to civic participation. Last but not least, the engagement of CSOs throughout this process and throughout anti-corruption work in general, as we will, I'm sure, all agree, is crucial. We have been engaging CSOs in our working group process from the start of our program. And just a few weeks ago, we held a CSO training bringing together representatives of organizations from the 10 municipalities to make sure that they're well equipped to support and monitor the implementation of the adopted reform agendas. In a nutshell, this is the current anti-corruption programming done by IRI and the methodology that stands behind it, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia. I guess from Sofia. That introducing to us this new methodology for working in the municipal level. Hopefully we'll get back here in a few years' time to assess the effects of this methodology and maybe expand it to the rest of Bulgaria, but also implement in our own countries as a tool for fighting corruption. Also, for me, was noticeable this emphasizing on citizen disengagement, because it's not really only for the corruption issues, but on many issues where public participation or citizens' involvement is important in policy making and other things, especially on municipal level. Those are lacking, mainly because we adopted systems that are not linking the voting to the accountability to the citizens, but more to the political parties. But that's another issues that we might debate here. And finally, to conclude the panel opening speeches with Andrei Maksut, take the floor, and then we'll go to the debate.
Hi everyone. It's pretty late in the evening, so I'll try to move pretty fast. We've talked today about the concept of strategic corruption and some of the mechanisms by which it manifests. We haven't really talked a lot about the structures by which strategic corruption has an impact at national level, so that's what I'm intending to do here. A bit of myth busting before we begin. Corruption is not a homogeneous phenomenon, so typically when we hear people discussing about corruption, they say something like, oh, everybody's corrupt, everybody at the top is in on it, it's all connected. It's not necessarily the case, though. There is corruption, even in the most corrupt societies. There is corruption that is somehow divided according to camps, and these are corruption networks that aren't necessarily allies of each other. So we can understand strategic corruption as a phenomenon which affects one network of corruption in a given country, but maybe not others. And that one network receives resources and support from outside governments or outside forces in order to successfully compete with other rival networks in a country for resources, power, and so on. This is a phenomenon that has been documented before. In Magyar Madlovic, they mentioned that political competition in post-communist countries especially is often a facade for competition between different patronal networks, meaning that even though there is political competition, even though there are legitimate elections and genuine power turnover, the winners simply bring their own clients into power, and the process of using public resources for private gains continues. The differences, however, there are some differences, however, that can be noticed between how these networks operate within a country. It's not a unitary phenomenon, even within the same country, in the case of Romania in this case. And those differences that we observe can be split into different categories according to incumbency, electoral performance, and type of office, in this case, decision maker or lower-level civil servant, which is in line with the presentation that Todor showed a bit earlier. To understand this visually, this is a general model of corruption in Romania. Now, I could talk for an hour about this model and what we see here, but focus a little bit on the role of citizens and what they do. They put incumbents in power through elections, and they offer speed money, or in this case, bribe or other resources, to civil servants for various benefits. The important thing to note here is, one, elections change not just the incumbents in office, but the entire network itself. So the incumbents who give access to resources to their clients in exchange for kickbacks, and who appoint loyal civil servants to the administration also in exchange for kickbacks, these are all connected. So you oust one incumbent, bring in another, and they will bring their own networks in place to reignite this entire process. And the second thing I'd like you to notice about this is that rival networks oftentimes monitor and denounce each other. So even though both networks or multiple networks are corrupt, they do, for the sake of the competition with other rival networks, they do sometimes act as whistleblowers, or they sometimes act as, they sometimes cooperate with authorities against rivals. And there is some evidence of this happening, which I will go into now a little bit. The first piece of evidence that we have is an incumbency bias that we see. So by and large in Romania, we notice that mayors that are from the same party, at a bit of context, first of all. Romania is divided into several counties, about 40, and each county has one county council president whose power is quite significant because they're the ones that decide how much money from the government goes to mayors at lower level. And what we've noticed is that when mayors are from the same party as the county council presidents, they are indicted or investigated much less than those that are from a different party, which seems to indicate either that county council presidents control prosecutors and tell them who to investigate or not, which is unlikely. We can't really work with that assumption. There's no evidence at this point of that happening in the data that we looked at least. But there's also a possibility that county council presidents or bosses in general stay silent about corruption within their own network while reporting to the authorities corruption in rival networks. And this is the first piece of evidence that we see in the incumbency bias. There is no such incumbency bias related to EU funds. If you look back a bit to the model of corruption here and the role of the European Union that supplies EU funds and oversight, we see that in the oversight that European Union has over EU funding, there is no incumbency bias. You're equally likely to be investigated whether you are a mayor from the county opposition or from the county incumbent. It doesn't matter. It does, however, matter when it comes to funds that are not from the European Union, in which case you are twice as likely to be investigated if you're from the opposition than if you are from the incumbent. And we have data for this. I'm not going to go into it now because we're short on time. The third conclusion, like I mentioned, is that county bosses, or bosses in general, tolerate corruption within their own network. And this is how networks consolidate themselves and grow. There was actually a competition in Romania a few years back about joining corrupt networks in order to gain protection from prosecution. The second piece of evidence that we have that this phenomenon happens is in electoral performance. And here you see a map of Romania divided into the counties that we looked at. Green are the counties where there has been a change in the ruling party in at least one of the past 3 electoral cycles from 2008 to 2020. And red shows counties where no such change took place. So the same party was in power through the entire intervals, and these we call party strongholds. I'm not going to go too much into demographics and such. Suffice it to say that generally speaking, party strongholds tend to be less populated and poorer. This isn't always the case, but they tend to be so, and the difference is significant. And here we have further evidence of electoral performance that points to networks protecting their own. There are a lot of figures here, so I'll only ask you to focus on the table to the right, to the left, sorry, my right, your left. The first row, while the in party strongholds, that's what the table refers to. In party strongholds, we see that when the party that is in charge at local level in the county is also in government, we see the fewest investigations of proven corruption cases. So all of these cases are proven. There's a definitive sentence. It all happened there. And compare, please, the difference between the incumbents and the opposition. What do we see? When the party that is in power in a party stronghold, where they have very strong local networks, they control a lot of mayors, they have high electoral support, and they also control the government, we see the fewest instances of investigations for corruption. That same county, in that same context, only in opposition, we see a significant increase in the number of investigations. Now, people don't just suddenly become less corrupt because they're in government or more corrupt because they're in opposition. In fact, evidence would point to the opposite being true. You might assume you're more corrupt when your network is stronger and you're receiving more money from the government. However, the fact that this pattern is reversed points to the fact that when there is a change in government and the parties that are strong in a county join the opposition, they begin to be, their networks begin to come under attack. When the prefects, for example, or anti-corruption agencies from the center are controlled by political forces that are hostile, that's when you see an increase in number of investigations and a dismantling of the networks, as you can see, because the number of lower-level civil servants that are investigated increases much more than the number of decision makers, which points to to there being several involved with one decision maker. If you look at the other table, though, which refers to counties where you've had competition and where power turnover happens quite frequently, then the networks in place are not as consolidated. There is not one party that controls a lot of mayors and can rely on electoral support. In those cases, the threat of being replaced during elections is very real. Very real. And this is why you see that the pattern is reversed. You see more investigations while that party is also in government than when they are in opposition. This can be explained by an incentive of that party to clamp down on rival political networks. So they use extra resources and extra influence while incumbent in order to denounce and get their political rivals investigated, consolidating their hold on the county in the hopes of future re-election. This is a breakdown of the main conclusions that I've already mentioned here. What I'd like to point out again is that based on this data, we can draw a conclusion that consolidated networks are less likely to denounce corrupt behavior. And this has a few implications for policy. First of all, because corruption is a heterogeneous phenomenon, we cannot use one-size-fits-all policies, like sweeping policies at national level, and expect them to have the same effect everywhere. Patronal networks are quite dynamic. They compete with each other, and they sometimes cooperate with public institutions against rival corruption networks, which is why integrity agencies and authorities should focus their efforts on older, more consolidated network where the chances of whistleblowers appearing are much less than in cases where rival networks have an incentive to denounce each other. And the last conclusion that might help is that frequent power turnover, especially at local level, may help with controlling corruption. This is the same kind of phenomenon that we see at national level between democracies where you have genuine competition for power and autocracies where you have one pole of power and every network is consolidated around that one pole. You simply have more incentive for integrity in a competitive setting. But this doesn't apply just to national level. You need to have the same kind of mechanisms in local politics as well. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the following section.
Thank you, Andrei, for this interesting presentation, starting from the myth-busting that we can debate about, especially this coverage of rivalry in politics for corruptive networks. And actually, it took me few slides to realize that when you talk about corruptive networks, you more or less speak about political parties. So where that stands. This concludes the part of the initial introductory speeches for our panelists. So now I open the floor for questions or comments from you in the audience. And I think we still have, according to the agenda, at least 10 minutes, and I guess we can stay a bit more. There is a question here.
You said a question or a comment. So I'd like to make a comment. The idea is, okay, we have to base our decision on numbers, but not only on numbers. This is for Andrei, for my compatriot here. When you're talking about corruption, integrity, maybe you will find moments when numbers are not the most important things in analyzing this phenomenon. So you may commit a mistake if you do not have the right information. I stated the idea and the importance to have the inside information from people that know how the things are made there. Yeah? So whistleblowing and how to reward them, to make them to assume the risk to be a whistleblower. I don't know if you were in the position of a whistleblower, to act as a whistleblower. It's not very pleasant, usually. So the comment is like this. We are able to make rankings, tops, and so on. But what we have to do is to interpret data, not to be slaves of data. Because otherwise, we will put in a ranking Russian Federation on 46 and Greece, as inventor of democracy and democratic principles, on 58. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's collect 2 more questions, as this was more comment than a question. Anybody else from the audience? Ruslan?
Going back, thank you. Quite interesting panel, because this is, I think this is where we go local and need to focus on these networks. Indeed, my question was back to national security, maybe to the representatives of the 2 anti-corruption agencies in Kosovo and Montenegro. Have you seen a drive to securitize anti-corruption in recent years, and what has, what have been the evidence about that, and what has you changed? How has this changed your way of working? And then to the whole panel, in terms of uprooting those networks about which Andrei spoke, and if I understand the principles of competition, I would like to talk about checks and balances, and I think this is precisely the idea. I mean, if you keep, and of course you have the checks and balances, but you have also law enforcement. So if you have on the one hand side law enforcement that takes out the longest existing networks, and then you have some competition to prevent others from doing so, what do you see as a, have you seen any example or instrument of such a network being taken out? I know in Romania you had quite a number of mayors and people taken out. And do you see any learning in the system? Because, for example, I've seen for many, many years the corruption pressure on customs before we were members of the EU. After they removed the customs, that's clear. You don't have any more oppression because it doesn't exist. But before that, you had a constant kind of pressure on doing that. The same thing with public procurement. You have quite a lot of data, and it shows, it clearly shows that there are concentration of public procurement, there is lack of quality. So the question is, where do we begin? Is there any sector, any mechanism that we want to target? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruslan. And is there any last question maybe to collect and then go to the answers? Or if not, we move to the final words, I guess, starting from the anti-corruption agencies on the question of Ruslan, and then other panelists if they feel.
Okay, works, yeah? Thank you. I think comments and questions were great. I would like just to go back to what our colleagues from Romania stated. I think what whistleblower, the way that whistleblowing system works in United States, for example, is very difficult to work in our region without having, on top of that, without having motivation, financial motivation to report. I think what we expect in our country is a bit too much for a person to report wrongdoings, in case he's removed from a job, to go to the court to get that right, and that takes up to 10 years. So it's a bit too much, even without having any kind of motivation to do that, except this self-sacrificing motivation for the good of the public, which is okay, but it's very, I think, complex and difficult to work in the smaller environments, and I think our societies are very small, so it's very difficult also to remain, like, without the identity to remain, like, not known, because everyone knows everyone in smaller regions. So it's another, I think, topic that we should maybe rethink if we will revisit the law on whistleblowing, even though I know that it's like 100% in line with EU directive on whistleblowing, but we should take also, I think, in the question, the context that we work on our daily basis. then going back to the other topic raised, I think yes, it's going both ways. It's going like positively, negatively, how to say the securitarization of corruption. I'm saying in negative way because, for example, starting from transparency, because of the potential to, how to say, to get the other side, the top secret information, which is not top secret. We have legislation in place that, for example, now the assets of officials in Kosovo that have some connection to security, to public security, they should not be public anymore. So it's kind of closing down the institution, and that on itself may have the risk of increasing corruption rather than reducing and preserving the security of the state. On the other side, we have a positive trend when institutions that deliver or they maintain security, they are starting to make their integrity plans internal. So they are thinking this more seriously. We have, for example, Ministry of Interior, including police and other services that have already done these integrity plans, and they are in place with all the measures. We also, I'm talking about the defense also, about the intelligence. So it's influencing our work. So it's making our work a bit less transparent, so to say. But also it's putting additional pressure to put in place this integrity mechanisms that would contribute also to our work. So that is more or less my comment on these two issues raised.
Thank you.
I think that the whistleblowers is very important, and in Montenegro, in last months, we have very good cases or bad cases. Maybe it's not good. Good is not a fine word for that situation, because whistleblowers apply to agency that the judicial council has some wrong or criminal acts to elected the judges of high court in Montenegro. That's, I think, very big cases, and the whistleblower said everything right, and the election for one judges is very wrong, and its agency opened the cases, and I think last 10 days ago we have opinion about that cases, and it's very important for Montenegro, and it's important to show every state institution that everything will be transparent, and everything can be out of institution. So whistleblowers in Montenegro, I think that's the good for Montenegro. Another questions, I think that our colleagues can say something, and about integrity plans. Every state in Montenegro, and we are a very small country, but we have around 1,000 state institutions, so we have very much plans integrity, but we have we have good job in that part of our work, because OECD said that we have 4.5 great about integrity plan. So we are good and that part of work of agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Jelena. Just continue if you feel like.
Thanks. In respect, I'm tempted to comment on the comment about the whistleblowers. I would say at the municipal level, where everyone knows everyone in the majority of cases, a huge challenge is anonymity, and in Bulgaria is the case that the law does not allow for anonymous signals to be investigated. And this is a challenge, a real tangible challenge. The practical solution here would be intermediaries, providing a channel for citizens, for whistleblowers to share signals with an institution or a CSO or other intermediary that will then officialize those channels. Going back to Ruslan's questions, you asked what sectors we would start with. How about thinking in a cross-sectoral manner and focus not so much on sectors such as procurement or hiring of civic servants, but rather take a cross-sectoral approach and focus on institutions and how the legislative framework is being implemented. And in respect to the question about networks, and this is more a question for Andrei, whether he's seen an example of networks taking out. I would say that even if certain networks are taken out, if we don't change the system through reforms, then new networks, as we saw from your data, are quite fast to establish themselves and fill in that void. So again, let's focus on changing the system through reforms so that we make it harder and harder and harder for those networks to form, as opposed to focusing on taking out particular networks, because this might be an internal, like an eternal fight with, without a very big impact. Andrei.
Thank you. Regarding the issue of whistleblowers, we generally assume that whistleblowers are honest civil servants or people who work within the institution who just want integrity and therefore they blow the whistle on corruption for the sake of integrity. This is not necessarily the case. It oftentimes, and we've actually seen cases like this in Romania, it oftentimes happens that whistleblowers or people who go to authorities to denounce corrupt behavior, they are part of corruption networks themselves or loyal to other corrupt decision makers, but they're simply not in the one that is currently in power. We've had, for example, cases where mayors were denounced to the authorities and sent to jail for things that they committed by the vice mayor, and the vice mayor then, of course, took over his office. So we can't really say that they were acting altruistically. That's one of the problems that we have with whistleblowing legislation in general. It requires corrupt deeds to already have happened. They don't prevent things, they simply lead to capture of people who already committed the deed. In terms of what you can do, as I understand Ruslan's question, the issue with corruption networks that keep appearing isn't removing one network from power. That happens every time there's power turnover in a county in Romania. So that happens very frequently. Or whenever a party collapses and doesn't make it into parliament or loses or simply ceases to exist, the network itself is dismantled, or it moves from an organization level to an individual level. So each person with their personal clients. The problem there isn't how to stop networks, how to dismantle them. The problem is how to prevent new ones from appearing, as was already stated. And that is a much more difficult challenge. What we've seen in Romania over the past 20 years or so is a crackdown on petty corruption. So you had corruption that was very individualized because everybody could collect a bribe for themselves. So you had problems with traffic police, you had problems with border police, you had problems with individual civil servants at the booth who would interact directly with citizens. And what we've noticed is that that these things not only harmed the development of a community, but they also really upset decision makers. Because if you're corrupt individually, there's no kickback going up the chain. your boss doesn't get any money if you're corrupt and not part of a network. So we saw crackdowns in the sense that cameras are mounted in institutions to film people at the booth, so you can't pay a bribe. Police officers now are required to wear body cams and microphones, so every interaction is recorded. It's very difficult now to bribe a traffic policeman, for example, in Romania. But we've seen very little being done on actually dismantling networks and tackling grand corruption, which is the access to resources that decision makers give to their direct clients. There's been very little done there. That is the challenge. And some of the solutions that we've seen are, first of all, more democracy, depolitization, insulate the bureaucracy from the decision makers as much as possible, because otherwise they're very easy to I wouldn't say necessarily adopt, but to lure into your existing networks. And of course, for the short term, you can just use one corrupt network against the other. Just change the incumbents frequently with every election, if possible, and then work with the opposition to oversee the new incumbents. It's a ping pong game, but it's so far the best thing we have.
Thank you, Andrei. And this with incumbents fighting and changing over functions if they actually fight the others. But in many cases, they just tolerate each other. They complain and expose, but when the time comes to prosecute, they don't do it, even when they come to power. Would you like? Okay.
Thank you, Alexander. We had recently a case with discussing with one public organization here in Bulgaria about the whistleblowers. So how to work with whistleblowers within the organization when, you know, even in a big public organization, it's very difficult when someone needs to report actually his or her colleagues. And the problem is that the defense of the person who is reporting is almost impossible because, you know, when two people knows something, all the others knows the same and know it also. So the question was, is it possible to have real protection for whistleblowers in public organizations, or you need to make or ensure procedures whistleblowers to go to another public organization, like, for example, Anti-Corruption Commission? But in this case, I would say, middle and top management of this public organization said something like, okay, but if they go there to the Anti-Corruption Commission, then it will be clear that we haven't did our job in a proper way, so there will be a problem for us. It's better to whistleblowers to report to within organizations, so internally, and not to report these facts to some outside of us. So there is this discrepancy between the goals of the public organizations sometimes, which is also an important thing. And in most of the cases, these in a way lead to kind of freezing the possible counteractions that can be implemented. And in terms of securization, and what Andrei just said about the ping pong game, I like this. One of the most effective measures that have been outlined in most of these anti-corruption assessments that we have done in more than 20 public organizations across all Europe is rotation of the staff. So it looks very easy to be done, but on a practical side it is not, but the result shows that this is one of the most effective anti-corruption measures. Why? Because when you rotate the staff, actually you cut the links to the local networks. Again, with the rotation of the staff, you can even introduce some what we call some new people within the teams that including could be part of the inspectorate or part of the other units that are entitled to investigate the wrongdoings. But what will happen if you have a systematic corruption in a given public organization? Like right now, most of the colleagues here in Bulgaria knows there is a problem with the border police because there is a lot of migrants crossing freely actually the border, and most of them have been catched by police within the country or on the other border to Serbia and Romania and so on. And in most of the cases, it is clear that there are some employees, there are some officers from the border police that are cooperating with the migrants, that there is systematic corruption and there. And at the same time, this shows how this systematic corruption in some cases could have a very serious could be a very serious threat to national security, like in this case, as there could be not only migrants crossing the border, but also there could be some smugglers, there could be some drug smugglers and so on, crossing together with the migrants, as it was the case in a few of the examples here in the last year. So that is why the anti-corruption measures and anti-corruption policies should be prioritized by all the institutions, and that is why the anti-corruption efforts should not be how to say periodic, but should be present constantly.
Thank you, Todor, and especially for connecting corruption with national security, which was the topic of the whole conference. So I think this was a good closure. So I want to thank you, thank all the panelists, thank you all for staying until the end. Also thank the organizers, especially Ministry of Justice and Basel Institute on Governance, but of course mostly to the Center for Study of Democracy, Ruslan, Daniela, Christina, and especially Gloria, as I heard. Sorry if I missed somebody. And as we are promoting monitoring of others, organizers also asked me to tell you that we are also want to be monitored, so to remind you to fill evaluation forms about the conference. And with that note, I'll leave you to finish the day and enjoy the evening, especially those going on the cocktail party of the ministry, but I wish you all the best. And as Todor ended up, there is still a lot of work to do and to fight this systematic corruption. So see you soon on some other event like this. Thank you all.